Good morning, afternoon or evening and welcome back to Ventura Studio with me, Dan. Today we'll be building this fantastic Spitfire MkVb Airfix model. We are going to be building the RAF one. So let's get stuck in. Alright, so to start I'll be focusing on the interior cockpit. Now I'm not going to spend too much time showing you how I put all this together. We all know how to put models together. But there is some just great detail found in this kit. As you can see me there putting together the seat. Here's the rudder control and the pedals. And then being a bit confused about how to put this final bit of the seat together, but I did find my way eventually. And I really wanted to put all these parts together individually so we can really get some good detail going. And there I've put the panel on and the pedals. But I think we're going to pause there while we start to paint up. So first off, some black primer. Always like to use black primer, especially for the interiors where there'd just be those extra few shadows. Then using some of this fantastic interior green and steel colours. Majority of the inside of this cockpit would be that just classic interior green, which would just help not to distract the pilots, in a similar way that cockpits today are quite standardised in how they look, just so the pilots can keep their mind on exactly what they're doing. Going along with the brush, I started adding some of these extra key details, so some matte blacks finishes on some of these. And the instrument panel itself, I gave a nice undercoat of black. And the back cushion on the seat as well. I wanted to use a little bit of copper colour just to really highlight some of the piping or tubing that's happening inside. So a bit of a dry brush effect, just going over all of these raised wiring, and you can see it, the effect comes out really good. And to cover that off, I started with a gloss acrylic varnish, which you can see makes it just that extra bit shiny and puts all those colours to make them pop a little bit. You can see me struggling to get the decal off the table, but when I finally do, I use a bit of micro sol just to soften up the surface. Did struggle a little bit with it getting caught on some of the raised instrument panels, but eventually we got there. And then I took off a lot of the micro sol with a earbud. Following that, I did cover it with some micro set and did the same drill, just taking that off with a cotton bud to let it sort of set into the grooves. To weather the inside here, I used some oil paints, and I'm going to try and step away from using oil paints, but they just give such a great amount of depth. Quite thinned with distilled turpentine, just letting it all soak in, and then going over a lot of the open panels with a damp cotton bud dipped into some distilled turpentine just to take off some of that excess flow. And then finally used a bit of matte to cover it up. So starting to put it all together then. So you can see that all the cockpit pieces have followed the same method. We've weathered and we've done a matte coat, and then it's time to put it all together, which you can be a bit loose with because all of this is going to be hidden effectively by the Spitfire body anyway. But all this fit together pretty great, if I'm honest. It all just fitted into place, apart from places where I bent it by accident, so just be careful that you don't. But you can't see it on the final model, which is just fantastic. So then starting to sit that into place where it will be on the wider Spitfire body, and just using some of the Tamiya extra thin cement to get it to sit. What I'm doing here, I'm cutting off a bit of the body because we're going to use this as a door. So this is part of the body which flaps down and the pilots can get in and out. You know, it's the door, effectively. Well, it is the door. But just cutting that little bit extra off. I'm going to save that for later, get that primed up, get it painted in that interior green, and then we can put that as a final step. The model fit together really easily. I just put this extra amount of tape on it to let it sit, then use some of the Tamiya extra thin cement just to get it all to merge into each other. Add in the engine cover here, what I assume is the engine cover. And then it was time to get started on the wings. So I did put together the wings first rather than put them together when they're all sat on the same body. Just felt like it flowed better for me. You can see in the background I've gone over some of the inside with some extra black, just so that any light doesn't shine through. With the wings all done, I sat the body on it and it fit together like a glove. Same for the rear wings here, just sand off any excess flash or anything like that, just to get it super flat. But all this does go together like a dream. Putting on the rear flaps, again, nice and easy. It's like this model really wanted to go together. Now I am putting the wheels on at this point, however you won't see in this video, but I ended up taking the wheels back off to let me focus on painting. There'll be a point in the video that you'll notice the wheels are no longer on. And that's okay, because they end up coming back at the end, so don't get too worried about it. But I just found myself keep pressing down on the Spitfire when I'm working on it, and the wheels would eventually just bend and break. The propeller system, once I worked out how to do it, went on nice and easy, and then I glued that in with some thin cement. The antenna here was the same culprit, where I turned the model upside down, it bent off, so it will disappear at some point, but I promise it will come back. So let's get going on painting then. And I took all my hold together tape, which is what I'm going to call it, hold together tape. There we go. Took that off, masked up the canopy just as much as I wanted to, then went to work on the body with some grey primer. Now I did mask up quite a lot of areas, and looking back I really didn't need to, if I'm completely honest. What I masked up there is for a sky blue compartment at the end, but I could have just gone back and done the sky blue once I'd done the rest, but you know, we did it, we live and learn, and it all worked out in the end. I'm just masking off any areas that I don't want to be hit by the camouflage paints, especially the underneath, which we want to just look super clean, just nice clean lines. And there is a strip just on the wings that you can see me doing here that's going to be yellow in the end, so I didn't want any greens or greys underneath that are going to take away from that. And these are all the paints that I'm using, so we've got the ocean grey, medium sea grey, RAF greens, gunmetals, sky, and those will form the full basis of what we're about to do. I started off with some panel lines just to give it that extra little pop, and then went over it all with a base coat of ocean grey, which is forming the first colour of my camouflage. Using some of this awesome camouflage putty, just sort of created some extra lines around the body in place of where the camouflage will be, and then went to town with the RAF green. Once those coats were done and let it set for a minute, I took off the camouflage putty, which revealed our awesome camouflage pattern underneath. And it gets time that we could take out the cockpit too. The underneath is going to get the medium sea grey. You can see where we've masked again. to take that off, and it should reveal a nice clean line. Yeah, nice. So we've got all the clean lines around there. And now I went to really to town with the masking here. And this is to get our sky green into place for both the propeller and the rear marking. We got some nice clean lines out of this too. The trainer yellow is going to go on the strips of the front side wings, and this yellow was just a flat Tamiya yellow. And the same for the tips of the propellers. Once those are all done, take off your masking, and it leaves us with a nice, clean final look. I'm using some of the gunmetal here for the exhausts, which is just such a great metallic looking colour from Tamiya that I use for most of my metal look. Hitting the tips of the wings with that too. You can see I've put my flat black coat on the propellers, and we've got some really clean looking lines, and then a bit of rubber black for the wheels, which are still on at this point, which I wasn't sure if they'd have gone by now, but they are still there. And there we go. That's all our base colours done for the Spitfire. So that's our camouflage patterns and all highlight sections. And then just going to go over it with a nice gloss colour to give it that extra pop when we start weathering. Moving on to the decals then. Again, I always use micro sol and micro set first with a layer of sol. Pop down your stickers and then going over the top with a nice bit of micro set. And you can see there's quite a lot of raised areas underneath the Spitfire here, but once we've done this method, they merge into it as if they are painted on, and it is just great. A few extra decals then on the rear wings and on the center compartments. I won't show you all the decals because we'll be here all day, but giving them all time to sort of set in just makes them all look just that extra bit of realistic. These red zones over the gun ports on the sides are nice and tricky to put on, but you know, they worked out in the end. And then it was time to do all the major decals on one side. I'm only going to focus on one side for this because the process is repeated. Now I did put this sky green either too big or too far forward. I think you usually find it a bit closer to the rear wing, but it was alright in the end. Just getting all these decals down, and just remember that there is micro set and micro sol in play on every single one of these, because I couldn't do it without it. And I put this one down and it was nice and mangled, and I was a bit worried that I'd just about ruined the entire model. However, with a bit of manipulation with both fingers and the tweezers, we came back to life, and thankfully it was all good. I did notice that the roundel was sitting a little bit high, so I popped a bit of micro sol on and just brought it down just a little bit to make it look a bit more real. And going over the top of that with just some extra decals, some warning signs, and then what looks like our pilot's call sign. Should we call him Crusader or Knight? We'll let him decide. These little engine port warnings, and then we're going to move on to the wings as well. And these were nice and fun, so I always have just a great time with the extra long decals, which just love to flap about in the wind. But by using a good amount of sol and set, you know, we get extra time to work with it. We get those walkways along. I was a bit worried that me pulling on this with the tweezers was going to break it, but it worked out alright. Although when it was down, I did start to worry. So let's move back to the fingers just to move that around. But plenty of sol, set, or even water just gives you a bit more time. And you can see there's a nice bit of wing that is holding up there, you know, a raised spot, but the micro sol over that, and by the time that that's dried, it will be all looking good. And again, another coat of gloss just to seal in those decals and prep it for the final stage of weathering. So I started off my weathering with panel lines and raised areas, and this is again oil paints, so just letting all that seep into these lines or just dots that you'd find on a real Spitfire. Now it will look a little bit artificial when you first do this, so what you need to do is go back over it with your Q-tip, or earbud as we call them in Wales, dipped in a little bit of turpentine, and just really take the majority of it off, just leaving those lines set in the model. We're going to do the same for the top. Now looking back, one side of this did turn out to be a little bit heavier on the panel lines than the other, but I think it worked, and it just gives it that extra little bit of uniqueness, depending on how you look at it. This is actually my first time doing panel lines, so it was an interesting experience and definitely learned quite a bit from it. Probably putting too much on is my main takeaway. But you've always got the option of taking it off with turpentine. I did worry at some points that I was starting to pull back the base layers and whether the gloss layers hadn't fully worked, but you know, once it was all done, it just looked awesome, and I was super happy at this point. I did do another seal layer because I was going to switch to acrylic paints, and I didn't want them interacting with the oil and enamel that I'd already used. And this is the next stage. So what I'm doing here, I'm using some of the base colours just lightened just a touch with either buff or with white, just to give a bit of differentiation, not only to the colours or the panels themselves, but also some of the decals, to let them really blend into the machine. I'm using a bit of whole red here with some NATO black. Really mixing that up. What we're going to do is that this is going to form what looks like the oxide or the primed layer of the underneath. So particularly where the exhaust has burnt back or burnt off that paint, and it's revealed the oxide layer underneath, and sort of tapering it off the further back it gets, where the heat hasn't been just so bad. I was really happy with how this exhaust effect came out, and definitely a technique that I'll be using again in the future. I used it a little bit more, but this time with a sponge, and it's a bit more, it's where the chipping's going to be going, but it's almost an underlayer to the chipping. So the paint's been stripped a little bit, and then going over the top of that with a nice bit of steel chipping to show extra scratches where the paint's really rubbed right back, in particular for really super high wear areas. And using this smoky colour, I'm going to be drawing it back from where the gun ports are, just to sort of show us where the major gun smoke has affected the paint jobs. You probably find a little bit of this around the machine guns on the outside as well, but I wanted to keep that effect mainly for the big cannons. What feels like a final step here is a thicker layer of browns and blacks mixed together, just to give it a little bit of oil mixtures around the engine ports. We can move on to some of the finishing touches, which the first finishing touch is going to be the canopy. Now you've probably seen that I haven't put the canopy on, but you can see in the background that the wheels are off, so I wasn't lying earlier. The way that I did canopies for this was to stick a bit of masking tape onto the canopy, go around it with a bit of pen, take it back off, and then cut around it. And once we've done the cutting, we should be able to stick that back onto the canopy. Should be able to. And that should give us our perfectly masked canopy. Doing that for all the elements was tricky, but I've yet to find a better method that works. And I find that hand painting doesn't give you the same effect that airbrushes really do. That being said, I sort of just started working and I forgot that I wasn't wearing gloves. So whenever you do this, always wear gloves. And then taking off that masking reveals a nicely coloured cockpit canopy. I use Clearfix for this. On some of the other videos you're about to see on the channel or already have seen, I do have a tendency to discolour the cockpits with glue. So I'm really trying to stick away from that and using the Clearfix instead, which dries clear and doesn't interact with the clear plastic in the slightest. And putting these final touches on really lets me look at the model itself and see what I've built, and you know, I'm really happy with how this one turned out and hope you guys enjoy it too. Adding on that door that we spoke about earlier, and that is just formed from cutting out part of the plastic itself, then reattaching all the bits that I broke off throughout. So the wheels are back on, the antenna's back on, and with all that, we're ready for the showcase. Alright, so there we have it, the Spitfire MkVb from Airfix. This was an absolute dream to put together. I haven't built a Spitfire model since I was probably 7 or 8, so it's been great to dive back into it almost 20 years later. So many techniques that I've picked up from watching other YouTubers. I hope you've enjoyed me bringing my version of a Spitfire to life for you, and if there's any techniques that you picked out that you want me to expand on in future, let me know in the comments, and I'm more than happy to make videos dedicated to them. Thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy this video, please do like and subscribe. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time.